Hello and welcome to the MovieKing Podcast. My name is David Jurmann and I'll be your host. On today's episode, I'm going to review the film The Fire Inside, and in the second half, I'll be reviewing the movie Flow. Starting off with The Fire Inside, this is a film I was actually really excited for. I'm always down for a good sports drama, and this one looked really awesome to me actually from the trailer. It just gave me all the right feels. I'll see anything with Brian Tyree Henry in it, and there are some very, very talented people involved with this movie. Also, lately, movie theaters have been doing these mystery movies, and this week I had a feeling it might be The Fire Inside, so I went, and it was The Fire Inside, so I was really stoked. I got to see this movie just a little bit early, and having seen it, it is a good film. I am happy to report that it is worth your time, and definitely a very solid film. It is not exactly what I thought it was going to be, but I'll get more into that soon. Firstly, though, I want to talk about the performances, because Brian Tyree Henry, as I mentioned, I'll see literally anything with him. He is simply one of the best actors working today, along with like Hugh Jackman and Daniel Day-Lewis, Gary Oldman, Anthony Hopkins, Tom Hanks, Denzel Washington. All these actors are great. Brian Tyree Henry is right up there. Everything I've seen him in, from dramas like this, and If Beale Street Could Talk, and Causeway, to action and more comedic roles like Into the Spider-Verse, Across the Spider-Verse, Godzilla vs. Kong, Godzilla x Kong, and Bullet Train, to even one of my favorite performances of the year as Megatron in Transformers 1. I know it's a Transformers movie, but he is really terrific in it. This guy has so much range and is terrific in every role he's in. It's no different here. Like, the guy never seems like he's phoning it in. He's always putting in his best effort. And this is once again a really good performance from him, and I'll speak a little more to that soon. But he basically plays the trainer here in the mentor role. He does a fantastic job. He makes a lot of scenes impactful and has the spark they need to make them really engaging to watch and really, so you can feel the motivation going on. But I also want to shout out the other half of that, which is the lead, Ryan Destiny, which is sort of the trainee, who I haven't seen before in any film, but she does a great job here too. She shows a lot of emotion and struggle and conflict. She's a very captivating performance and holds a candle to Tyree Henry as well. She really just brings a lot to this movie and is definitely one of the more memorable parts of it. And I also really like their characters, who are real people, as this film is based on a true story. Clarissa Shields is a female boxer, and that's who the film's about, who had her rise to fame around a decade ago. I actually didn't know her story at all. I don't know if a lot of people know it, but I really wasn't familiar with it. But having seen the film, it's a very inspirational one for sure. As far as sports biopics go, like in the last bunch of years, this has to be one of the better stories in recent memory that I can think of. And as for the filmmaking itself, it's well made, it's well written and directed. Rachel Morrison is in the director's chair for the first time. This is her directorial debut after being the director of photography, aka the cinematography, for a lot of films like Black Panther, Fruitvale Station, and Dope. She's very talented behind the camera, and you can tell she's had her time doing, cinematography and stuff, because the fight scenes are impressively smooth. There's a lot of good coverage, and in general, there's a confidence there that she knows what she's looking for. I never really felt like this was, an amateur production. This really did feel like someone who knew what they were doing, really had a good eye for talent and a good eye for action. Just really, nice drama. Like, she paces out scenes well, and just works really well overall with this script and what the movie's looking for. She just does a really good job as a directorial debut, because those are very tough. Oftentimes, directorial debuts have a lot of problems. Like, there's just, the performances maybe aren't quite as strong, or the pacing's really off-putting. All that was good here. Like, that all felt really natural. She really felt like she knew what she was doing, so that was great. And the script is written by Barry Jenkins, who won Best Screenplay at the Oscars a few years ago for the movie Moonlight, and was nominated for If Beale Street Could Talk. That was also an excellent film. I love If Beale Street Could Talk. Moonlight's also very good. If Beale Street Could Talk was super underrated, though, as far as awards go. That movie definitely deserves a watch. He directed both of those films, which are very well made, and he is directing the upcoming film Mufasa the Lion King, which I will be seeing soon, and should have a review out pretty shortly for that as well. But the script here is pretty good. I think the real heart of it is between the characters, Clarissa Shields and her coach, Jason Crutchfield. They are like the two, real like soul of the film. They are like what's holding the whole thing together. If you look at like the real, like what's making this movie as good as it is, they are the key. The actors, the characters, both really hold it together. And when the movie spends time focusing on their relationship and dynamic, it's very riveting. I really enjoyed just kind of the mentor trainee like dynamic they had going on. How it was almost like a father daughter relationship in some ways. It just felt strong. Like you really did care about these people. You wanted to see them succeed. Each of them succeed in their own ways. You wanted to see them move forward in their careers. And that was like definitely what got me most interested in the movie. And I don't think the movie would be as strong without either these actors or the writing in it. The first half of this movie has a lot of this and generally focuses on S.H.I.E.L.D. trying to achieve a goal. It's well made, but also feels pretty familiar. And I think it has an issue other sports biopics have, which is that it doesn't feel like much of a challenge. And don't get me wrong, like I think, these scenes individually are very entertaining and they have like, a nice pace to them. They're well made. But what I'm kind of getting at here is it just doesn't feel like there's that much to be like worried about. You keep waiting for this struggle for the characters to overcome because it has the groundwork of an underdog story. A film I said this a lot about fairly recently was The Boys in the Boat, which was another movie that I don't think was nearly as well made as this. It had a very similar sort of like story where it's a few people kind of really trying to move up in the world and trying to further their careers and win these awards. And it's kind of like a similar thing though where it just felt like everything was kind of coming easy to them. I didn't really feel like they were struggling. The difference in the two is that I think The Fire Inside has much better characters, so that made the film more compelling to watch. But The Boys in the Boat, similarly, just didn't have that real oomph you needed. Like, it didn't have that real, like, moment where you're really, like, cheering and going nuts because you're like, yeah, they finally made it. Like, it doesn't have that in it, unfortunately, that's what I really wanted from this movie. It doesn't quite have that, but it's still very strong. But I wish it had a little more of a struggle. I didn't feel like the struggle here was that tough, so the wins didn't feel quite as triumphant as I was hoping for. They didn't feel quite as cheer-worthy, and the losses weren't as devastating either. Like, I was never really, like, breaking down or really, like, feeling that, like, heartbroken when something wouldn't work out. Like, it didn't feel, and maybe I'm not sure if that's on the direction of the script more. Both are, good, so that's very hard to figure out which was really the problem. Maybe it was the story itself. I don't know. It didn't feel like it quite had as much of a struggle as I was looking for in these kind of movies to really like elevate when things get great or grim, when things really need to get there. My biggest issue with the film is that it just didn't have the emotional impact I was hoping for. Because in the trailers, it really made it look like it was going to be like this really great underdog story, and it is a good one for sure. I just think I was hoping for a little more out of it. But then comes the second half of the film, which is a different story. It's far more grounded in reality. It's not nearly as much of a familiar underdog story as we've seen. It's much more of a drama than the first half. And this is where the movie shines most, in my opinion. It shows why this story needed to be told. I still didn't totally feel those emotions as much as I was hoping to, but it delivers a more nuanced and interesting look at this field, in sports and kind of Olympic training that I wasn't expecting to see. So that was a very pleasant surprise. I think it became a much more interesting film at that point. Not that it wasn't good before, but I think it became a lot better. I think I also just really appreciated the darkness that kind of comes into it and just a different angle on the story. It's not something I think I've really seen before, or at least to this extent. And I kind of wish the movie actually did a lot more of this type of stuff, because I think if it really just leaned more into this angle instead of like taking so long to get there, I think this actually could have been a great film. My other thing is the movie's a bit overstuffed. There are a few minor subplots with Shield's family and her father in particular. It was kind of rushed and didn't feel necessary to the rest of the story. Like, every time they kept cutting back to it, I was like, I don't really know what we're doing here. Like, I just don't really feel like this is nearly as interesting as everything else. And it was kind of hinted at early on, but I just didn't think it was very satisfying by the end of the film. I didn't feel like we really reached a point that was very meaningful to the characters. And there's also a big change in the lead's relationship towards the end that I thought needed a bit more time as well. It just kind of like it happened and that was fine. Like the change happened, but then getting kind of a resolution to that, I think could have used a bit more time. It just felt a bit rushed to me, and I don't know. It just didn't totally leave me like super satisfied like the way I was hoping to. Like it worked, but it didn't like emotionally grab me, which is kind of the main theme I'm getting at here. Like the movie is well made, it's well written, it's well acted, all these really good things. It just didn't quite get that emotion out of me that I was hoping it would. So overall, this is a good movie. I was hoping it would be a major awards contender. I'm not sure that it is, but it's still worth seeing and supporting. I enjoyed my time watching it. I think it is well made, and I'm glad I now know about the story and who Clarissa Shields is. I think this is worth seeing, and especially for the story alone. And yeah, I mean, I'd recommend it. So I'm gonna give it a B. Alright, and next up is the movie Flow. Right off the bat, I feel like this is a movie that I'm not gonna have quite as much to say about, which is why I'm kind of pairing this up with something else, because this movie, as I'll kind of explain, isn't a typical movie. It's a little bit different in some aspects, so I think it's a little hard to kind of review it the way I would typically review a different movie. But anyway, let's get started. It's a new animated film about a cat who is caught in a giant flood and has to learn to survive along with a bunch of other animals, different types of animals like a dog and a bird and a lemur, a bunch of other types of animals. And something to note about the film is that it's completely reliant on visuals, meaning there is no dialogue at all, no speaking from animals, not in the way that like animals would talk, like anthropomorphic animals like in Zootopia. They're not talking like people. They're not talking animals. They are simply just animals who make noises and communicate through actions. So the only noises you'll really hear are like meowing and barking and you get a lot of nice sound design from like the things around them, but no speaking words, and the actions are really what communicate things in the story and the looks on the animals' faces. The type of visual storytelling here can be very hit or miss, in my opinion, not in this movie, but just in general. Studios like Pixar have made fantastic shorts over the years like this with no talking, but if you do it wrong, it can be kind of boring and fall flat. Like, I think there's really it's really hit or miss with these things. I mean, because no talking can really be a gift and a curse. I think visual storytelling is super strong. That's why we see movies in the first place, to see things communicated in a way that's very meaningful emotionally, and you can really see everything happening. But if you do it wrong, it just falls flat and is a boring slog. So that's where the real risk of this movie comes from. But luckily, I think Flow has some very strong visual storytelling. These animals in the movie aren't super, let's say, smart like others in family films. They're not like the dogs in Secret Life of Pets or the, Rat Remy and Ratatouille. They're not like making these crazy, decisions that like a human would make. They're still animals at the end of the day. They're reacting to their instincts. And imagine animals like Doug from Up, the dog who's always looking for squirrels, if he couldn't talk through his collar. That's kind of what this is. These animals act like animals and make impulsive, sometimes questionable decisions, but if you know animals, you kind of see where they're coming from. But with that being said, I would say that the animal's state of mind is usually pretty clear. Like, if you're following along and you're really paying a lot of attention to how these animals react and what they're kind of known to do, you can see how they're feeling and why they're feeling the way they are. Like, it's very strong in that sense. Like, you can, if a dog, is trying to, like, be friends with the cat, like, you can really tell that. You can see it with your own eyes. You can feel that. And a lot of this is due to strong writing and direction that carefully thinks about how these animals should act and what they care about. It kind of gives each animal a goal and something that they really like, and it uses them to kind of give them personality the way that you would kind of want from a human. So as I'm saying though, all these animals have personality and want different things. For instance, there's a dog that just wants to be the cat's friend. The lemur only cares about his shiny objects like a mirror he can see himself in. And a lot of it is also due to the animation, which in of itself is stunning visually. It's so beautiful. I love the art style. It's kind of a watercolor look. It feels very different from other animated films and helps the movie stand out in its own way. And I think also just kind of lends itself to more visual storytelling opportunities that you wouldn't get in maybe a photorealistic movie or even like a 2D animated film. Like, it's a very different look from what I've seen before. And I think just in general, like, they did a really great job, especially for the budget, which I'd imagine is much smaller than your typical animated films. It just really looks great. The landscapes in particular are gorgeous. I love the use of lighting to elevate the scenery here. There are lots of shots at golden hour that took my breath away, honestly. Like, just the colors there and the way, like, the sun kind of moves. Like, it's just beautiful. It's so, so beautiful. One of the best animated looking movies of the year for sure. I wouldn't be shocked at all if this is up for Best Animated Feature at the Oscars, because it's really just that great looking. But as for the story itself, it's pretty decent, nothing to run home about in my opinion. It's really just watching some animals interact and learn to coexist in order to survive. And that's cool, but I think it kind of leads me into my main issue with the film, which is that it didn't need to be feature length. You know, like, I think short films are wonderful at telling these small stories, these small kinds of stories super well. As I mentioned with Pixar, they're just masterclass at it. But I think in a case like this, I think it was intended to be a short film originally, or it got moved to be a feature, but I think you can kind of feel within the story that, like, I think this would have been a lot better at a 20 to 40 minute short film than an hour 20-minute feature, because there's just not that much that happens. I mean, in all honesty, like, it's just a movie about animals trying to survive and, you know, be friends with each other, kind of, like, get along, and, I mean, that's kind of it. Like, the animals have personality, but because there's no talking, I think you're missing a little bit of that connection, like that human connection that would make it a little more engaging. But it's still well told. It's still a well-made film. And not to say that this is a bad feature, not at all. It's quite the contrary. But what I'm saying is that this probably would have worked better as a short film, given how stretched out the story feels. Because even with the best visual storytelling and beautiful animation, if you don't have these really complex characters and they can't talk either, there's just not as much to grasp onto. You really can't. So I think this movie probably would have been a bit better if it was either shorter, or maybe if there was more going on in the story to kind of make you forget about the fact that these animals can't talk. But even with that, I was impressed by how nicely done the film is. There's clearly a lot of heart and effort and care put into it, and it shows. Like, every frame of this movie feels like someone put a lot of time and consideration into it, especially, like, in the way that, literally, I mean, you're watching an animated film that's telling an entire story with no talking. Like, that's very, very hard to do. I don't think it's even, like, I can't even express how much of a challenge that is. I mean, I really can't even imagine it. Because even just writing it's probably very tough, but actually visualizing it on screen is even harder. But with that being said, it's not my favorite animated movie of the year or anything, but it's a nice little film that is worth supporting, or at least looking into watching. Especially if you enjoy animation, appreciate the art form, the medium, and, you know, you also just really love visual storytelling in that way. If you don't, you probably won't care for this movie. You might find it, you know, boring to get through. I just know that people react to these kind of movies in different ways, and I think it's one of those things you'll either get really, really into, or you'll just kind of check out. But I think it was definitely well made, and I can appreciate the effort that went into here. I also just want to note that the movie has a ridiculous amount of production logos before the movie starts, so you know this movie needed a lot of people putting their money into it just to get it made, so I can't even imagine how much of a team effort this was just to get made. But in any case, I'm going to give it a B. I was hoping to like it a bit more, I think, but I still think it's a very enjoyable film, and I'm glad I saw it. And that about does it for this episode. If you want to follow my reviews, you can find me on Letterboxd at MovieKing1224. You can also listen to this podcast on your favorite apps such as Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Music. If you have any comments or feedback, I would love to hear it and improve the show. And of course, if you've enjoyed this episode, please consider liking, subscribing, and hitting the notification bell to hear more like it. I appreciate you all so much for listening, and I'll talk to you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.